welcome back to the channel. Stu Clark here. Today I figured I'd do a follow-up to my water bomber video from last week, which did incredibly well. And I want to make, again, say a huge thanks to the pilots and firefighters that have, so far, we had a change in weather last week. It got a little bit cool. We had a bit of rain, and it really helped. And they actually are currently holding the fire line, which is fantastic news. Especially we've got some hot weather on the way here. So hopefully we'd have things maintained under some level of control over there. So that's fantastic. And I also want to make a huge shout out to Captain Rick Martin, who reached out to me. And he is the captain of Flight 272, one of the CL-415 water bombers that was fighting the fire out in Souk here. So yeah, just again, huge shout out to them, and big thank you very much for the effort going into containing that fire. But I figured, being a photography channel, the last video was more of just a kind of a quick thank you and some of the sharing some of the footage I got. But I figured today would go through and we have a look at both some of my in-camera settings and my setup from a both photography standpoint and the videos, how I managed to capture them. So yeah, and I think it's actually quite timely because we actually have the Hawaii Mars bomber, which was the classic water bomber, which actually I believe was built in 1942. That's right now up in Port Alberni on, I believe it's Sproat Lake. They actually be flying that down next weekend to be retired at the Aviation Museum in Sydney at the Victoria Airport. So that's kind of cool. So if you have an opportunity to go out and get some either photos or video of that, hopefully you'll get some tips from this video that'll help you out in there. So first off, especially if you're going to be dealing with kind of the water bombers on a lake like Shawnigan here, you want to make sure you're capturing the footage from the shore. You don't want to be out on the water. You don't want to be obstructing them in any way, shape, or form, both a large fine and potentially a really large fine if you actually caused a problem. So definitely you want to be able to make sure you're stationed from shore. This footage I captured was all on a full-frame Nikon Z8 and was also utilizing a 200 to 500 Nikon lens, and then also with a 1.4 teleconverter. So all these photos and videos were shot either 500mm or 700mm if I had the teleconverter I used. One of the things, because of the angles you're getting, you want to have a long lens so that if you're able to kind of, where I was actually accessing the lake was a bit of a point out into the water a little bit, which allowed me to get a fairly straight line when they're landing, which is really nice. You get almost the point of view that they're coming straight at you even though you're on the shore. And the long lens will really help in that. It was quite warm in the first day out, so a lot of the footage had a lot of atmospheric disturbance in the air, and you can see it in the footage. It looks quite wavy. It's just really hot, humid day, and there's no way around that if you're shooting any length of distance. The following day, which is actually the reason I've made this video, was that they actually, with the wind changed directions, so they're coming in from the other direction, and I got some amazing footage and photos, and that's kind of the big reason for making this video. I really just feel I had to share that footage and video with you. So one thing, if you're new to plane photography, which I am, almost everything I photograph has got fur and feathers on it. If you're posting any video, whatever you do, make sure you don't put music over top of the engine noise. I learned that lesson in all the comments, and I thank you for everyone's commenting on that. And this video, make sure to not have any music covering up the engine. One thing to be aware of, though, that last video was all shot in slow motion. Well, it was shot at a high frame rate, and then it was slowed down in DaVinci Resolve. And the problem is when you do that, you effectively are cutting the audio in half. So you only have audio for half the footage because you're basically stretching out the footage, but the audio doesn't stretch accordingly. So in order to have audio that syncs up with the video, either I have to stretch it out or I've got to kind of make it. Basically, I've got to cut the clips into a bunch and kind of put similar volumes and engine noise overlaying to kind of lay it out and make it stretch it out enough where it's in real-time audio, but then I just stretch it out to cover the clip. So that's why I went with the music. I was kind of just making a quick video. I didn't realize that it actually was going to blow up like it did. But I'll make sure if I ever take any plane footage again that I make sure to include real-time audio with it. And ideally, I just use a secondary recording device so that I have a longer amount of audio to kind of sync up with the video. So with this type of footage, both from the video and the photo side of it, a tripod for me is really helps. You can definitely handhold the footage for these, no problem. But the tripod offers a ton of benefits that can really kind of take the photos and video like this to the next level. So tripod wise, I'm using my Leo Photo LN364C, which is a really nice, tall, sturdy tripod. And it's great because you're on the cobbles of the lake. I was actually wading out about waist deep in the water to get this footage. So you want a really sturdy tripod, especially because it was quite a windy day. There were boats on the water, so there was wave action. So you want to have a really nice, solid tripod. You don't want to put your camera on a lightweight tripod when you're out in the water. Definitely not. The other thing that for me, which I've been using the Manfrotto 502 AH video head. One of the tricks when you get out there is you get your tripod all set up. It's really important that you get your tripod level. And the reason you want this is as you're panning, especially with the video, you don't want the camera all of a sudden changing to the far shoreline. So what I do is this tripod's got a level on the leg right there. So what you do is you level the tripod, you make sure the tripod head is level as well. Then when the camera's on there, once you can line up the tripod collar to make sure it's level as well. But what you want to do is you want to have a look at where the planes are landing. So as you look through the viewfinder and as you're panning down, you want to make sure that you maintain level with the far shoreline. So that way, as the plane is passing you, you'll see in some of this footage that as it's right across from me, everything's still level. So you're not ending up with, where you've got to try and crop it and you lose some great footage because you haven't got it leveled in camera. The other thing so this is a video fluid head, and video fluid heads they're quite nice. They give some really nice benefits for this style of photography because with the fluid does, it basically adds tension to both your pan and your tilt. And with these planes, they actually come in fairly slow. So with bird, if you're used to bird photography like I am, you can definitely handhold because a lot of bird flight is so quick. Unless you're kind of videoing an osprey hovering or things like that, most bird photography, it's so quick that the action following is going to be quite fluid just because of the speed of it. With these planes, because as they're coming in to scoop up the water, they're coming in a little bit slower than you might think. That you need quite a bit of tension on the whole system to make sure that you can maintain a nice smooth action as the plane is coming past you. So what I actually do with this head is I will crank up the fluid on both the pan and the tilt to the maximum. And especially with the weight of my gear, my lens and camera are about almost 9 pounds. And so it's kind of getting to the top end of the weight for this head setup. And so having the fluid tension at maximum, it really helps to maintain a nice smooth pan as you're following the plane across the water. And it helps to avoid some jitters. There's a little bit in the video, and that's where slowing the video down. If you shoot everything at real time and post it real time, you definitely see a lot more move of the camera just as you're trying to pan and follow it along. When you go into slow motion, that's the beautiful thing with slow motion. I was shooting at 60 frames per second or 120 frames per second, and then dropping it down to a 30 frames per second timeline. The video that's being posted is about half the speed or a quarter of the speed that's actually happening. So any little movements get really smoothed out. And that's one of the really nice benefits of posting the video in slow motion compared to real time. So a tripod is a vital piece of equipment for this style of this sort of shooting. If you're at an air show, for example, and you're just videoing planes flying around that aren't showing the land, whether or not it's level, not as critical. But because you're going to be panning down and seeing the land across the way, You want to make sure everything's as level as possible, just to avoid a little post-processing as possible. And then also from the video, you're going to get maximum quality out of it. Okay, so let's first take a look at the photos. When you're trying to photograph a prop plane, the general rule is you want to have motion in the props, and you want to see motion blur in the props. So typically you want to be anywhere from 1/250th to maximum 1/500th of a second. Anything beyond that, you'll definitely start to freeze the prop, and you'll start to see, like I said, it's probably totally frozen, and that's less than ideal. With this style of shooting, I was shooting anywhere from 1/40th of a second up to 1/250th of a second. And the reason I was going to 1/40th is as the planes are moving past me, I was also wanting to get some motion blur in the background. And if you're shooting at 1/500th at the speed these planes are, the background will be quite sharp. You'll end up with not a lot of motion in the background. You definitely get some blur in the props, but the background itself will be quite frozen. And given the amount of water that's coming off these planes as they're scooping up, especially as they hit the overflow and it starts pushing out the top, I was trying to get as much action and movement in that as possible. So I was shooting as slow as 1/40th of a second. And again, that's where the tripod is vital. If you're trying to handhold that, you'll be very unlikely to get a lot of shots sharp. Even with the tripod, most of the shots were not sharp, but I got enough that were. And this is where with this Nikon Z8, I'm shooting at 20 frames per second. And that kind of allows me to just shoot away. So it's basically as the plane hits the water in the distance, I just start shooting. And I'll just shoot all the way through to pan until they take off on the other side. The reason for doing it, it's not just a rapid fire shooting. It's not just hoping to get sharp shots in between, but also it was the background. There'd be a dock, there'd be a boat, there'd be a house, a cabin. And as they're kind of going down the shoreline, you're trying to hopefully, there's gaps where there's trees and there's kind of a really nice green background. So I was trying to hopefully capture those portions as well. So you're hoping to get sharp shots with a nice background. And kind of in the course of, in the 3 passes, I took like 1,500 photos of just having 3 passes, just letting it go. And you can get it, hoping, and from that, you have to go through and pick out not only sharp shots, but also then ones that are interesting from the background, and hopefully you get lots of water, action within the water and blur in the water that really adds to the image and really adds to the motion and the action of the image. But then even at 1/60th of a second, one of the photos, my favorite one of the shot we'll show here in a minute, you can actually see the rivets on the plane. It's so sharp. So it's a 60th of a second, the plane's right across from me, amazing motion blur on the props, but you can actually read the text on the plane. You can count the rivets on the plane, and this plane is shot at 500 mil halfway across the lake for me. So it's pretty amazing. So like I said, so we'll jump on the computer here, and we'll kind of walk through and we'll take a look at some of the photos and show you what I'm talking about. When you compare the different shutter speeds, you can see how it looks on the image and what I was going for with trying to slow the shutter speed down. And then we'll also take a look at the video and what video settings. So these were shot using auto ISO in manual mode. So I set my shutter speed and aperture and let the camera pick the ISO. The Nikon Z8 has plane subject detection mode, which did a fantastic job of focusing on the cockpit. It did pick up the propellers every once in a while, but for the most part, it was really good at keeping focused on the front of the plane. Okay, so let's have a look at the first photo here. So you can see this was shot at 1/320th of a second at f5.6 at ISO 72. So first off, you'll notice the background, how there are no boats or docks or houses. So definitely taking advantage of the high frames per second of the Z8 here in order to get a clean background. If you looked at the shots before this and after this, there's a dock here, there's a boat over here, and it's not nearly as clean. So ideally, with the high frames per second, you're able to capture trees and or a clean background, which is really nice. But you can see at the fairly high shutter speed of 1/320th of a second that the trees, for the most part, they're relatively sharp with very little motion blur in them. 3/20th also has a slight blur to the props. You aren't getting the full rotation though, so you get lots of great detail on the plane. This would be an ideal shutter speed if you didn't have access to a tripod and wanted to maximize sharpness and keepers on a single opportunity. So if you only had one pass of the plane, this would be a great way to I put a little bit higher shutter speed where you're still getting some motion, but you're more likely to get a sharp photo, as you can see by the detail in this shot. So the next shot, you can see I've dropped the shutter speed to 1/250th of a second. It shows more rotation on the props. You actually start to see more motion blur there. For this one, it's cropped at a 2:1. ratio, so it's more rectangular, not only works for the plane, but crops out some of the houses. Actually, the bottom in the original photo, you've got houses and everything else at the bottom of the frame. The mountainside in the background really adds to this image, in my opinion, as well. This shot was also taken at 1/250th a second. Again, you can see there's good motion blur in the prop. So 1/250th is kind of that perfect compromise if you're going to be hand holding, where you're going to get some motion in the props themselves. You can see the nice rotation there, but it's still going to be nice and sharp if you're not stabilized on a tripod. I like this shot as it's a little bit higher in altitude. You've actually got some of the smoke coming in over the ridge here, and it definitely adds some urgency to the image and the situation that this plane was in. So this shot was taken using the 1.4 teleconverter. So this is actually shot at 700 millimeters, as you can see here. The plane is over a kilometer away in this shot, so it's actually pretty amazing, the detail, given it was still quite a warm day. Again, this is shot at 1/250th a second, so you can see a good rotation on the props themselves as the plane's taking off. So this would be fairly high rotation on the props as they're the motors are fired up to lift the plane off the water. And this is about as low as you'd want to go to get any kind of consistency with sharpness at this focal length. You can see there is a little bit of atmospheric softening the image a little bit, but again, it was at quite a long distance. So again, another at 700 mil. The benefit, again, with being positioned on a point of land, you get the perception that I actually am in the flight path of the plane as it comes into scoop when I'm safely off to the side. Again, 700 mil, and this one was shot at 1/250th of a second again. So this was from the second day, and this was so they've actually coming from the north. The other day the previous day they were coming from the south, and so this one, the lighting is obviously much better. They were also a lot closer, and it was also cooler, so less atmospheric disturbance. All around a much higher image quality, and you can see with the detail on the plane in this one, just how amazing it is. So this one was shot at 1/100th of a second, and I think when these planes, especially when they're on the water, it seemed to be the perfect shutter speed for getting a full circular blur on the props. It just looked amazing, and also get a ton of motion blur in the water itself, where you can see where they're expelling the overflow, and just everything. There's lots of motion showing throughout this image. It really adds to the dramatic effect of it. And this thing was one of my favorite shots of the day. So this was shot at 1/60th of a second when the plane is right across from me. So about as close as I could get to these planes. The 1/60th, you can see because the props are a little bit off center in this one, I'm not looking straight on, they really accentuate the motion blur of them, and you can really see the circular motion of the props. But incredible sharpness out of it still. And this is where shooting off the tripod really benefits shooting at these slower shutter speeds. This would be a very difficult shot to get handheld without the tripod, just giving that little bit added stability as you're panning. But again, with the beautiful thing with this 1/60th of a second, all the motion blur in the water, the motion blur in the trees behind, it just really adds to the dramatic effect of this image. And this is the slowest shutter speed I shot for this for both days. This is actually shot at 1/40th of a second. This one is it's a pretty awesome shot, but what I really find that the 1/40th really adds dramatic effect to everything in the background, especially at the longer distance. But what you do find, a lot of the motion blur on the props is almost lost. They almost become invisible at 1/40th. So I think, especially because this would be, once the plane is in flight, the props would definitely be spinning a lot faster than when they're on the water. So ideally, you probably want to be at 1/100ths to kind of maximize the prop blur once they're in the air. Okay, so for video settings, one of the things the big thing I was using is shooting at a higher frame rate. So not shooting at 30 or 24 frames per second. I'd be shooting at either 60 or 120 frames per second. And the reason with the higher frame rate is the higher frame rate allows you to slow it down. So if you're putting it onto, say, a 30 frames per second timeline or a 24 frames per second timeline, what you do with that 60 frames per second video, to slow it down in DaVinci Resolve, you right click, you click on clip attributes, and you can change the frame rate to 30 frames per second. What that effectively does then, it makes that video, instead of downsizing it per se and deleting frames, it stretches that 60 frames per second video into a 30 frames per second video. So it makes it twice as long. So when you put that on your timeline, that say 10-second video becomes a 20-second video. And then it basically it's half the speed, so it's all slow motion. And like I said, it smooths everything out. It really adds a lot of drama to it in my mind. The downside is you will then have to come up with some audio for it. So the Nikon Z8 does record audio when you're shooting in the higher frame rates, but if you stretched it out, it would sound all slow motion and droned out. It would not sound normal. So in this, with video, I shot this at, the Nikon Z8's got some amazing 60 frames per second options. I'm shooting NRAW. This is a Nikon RAW video format in N-Log. So it allows me to get, it's got an amazing dynamic range, and this sort of situation, it's quite incredible. Amazing how much detail is captured, how much color from the white to blacks. It's really amazing. Really, this camera is just fantastic. So I'm shooting it at 5.4K, which is 5.4K 60, which is basically a 1.5 crop. So it's like the DX format. So it's basically at 5.4K at 60 frames per second. And it's nice because then it's cropping in. My 500mm video is shooting at 750mm effectively on a DX crop. So it's basically cropping in. I also shot a couple of the passes at 8K 60. So this is basically at 8K. So it's full frame, 60 frames per second in 8K. Unbelievable quality. It's just outstanding. And that's one of this camera is just going out with the Nikon Z8, coming from the DSLR days to the D500, which was an amazing photography camera for birds specifically. But when you go out with the Z8, it's just amazing having at your fingertips the potential quality of, I can shoot 8K, I can shoot up to 120 frames per second, so I can slow it right down. It's just an amazing camera that it really just, the amount of power you have at your fingertips with this camera, it just opens up so many opportunities. These planes, I would have gone down with my D500, taken a few snapshots and been happy with it. But being able to go down there now and get just incredible video footage on top of the amazing photos, things combined, like the vibration reduction combined with the IBIS, the in-body image stabilization, like say getting these 1/40th of a second photos that are super sharp. It's amazing. Like I say, the technology advances over the last few years are just incredible and really open up some amazing opportunities for you. Okay, so let's jump on the computer and we'll take a look at these videos now. Okay. So once again, huge thank you to all the firefighters and captains and pilots and crew of these planes for all the effort and helping to protect British Columbia, all of Canada. You know, unfortunate situation in Jasper where things just got a little bit out of control in such a immediate so quickly. Really thank you for joining in today. I hope you got some good info out there. If you do have an opportunity to photograph or video some of these planes, I hope this information was helpful to you. And until next time, we'll see you out there. Take care.